2 Chronicles, chapter 25. Amaziah was 25 years old when he became king, and he ruled 29 years from Jerusalem, the hometown of his mother Jehoiadan. Even though Amaziah obeyed the Lord by doing right, he refused to be completely faithful. For example, as soon as he had control of Judah, he arrested and killed the officers who had murdered his father. But the children of those officers were not killed. The Lord had commanded in the law of Moses that only the people who sinned were to be punished. Amaziah sent a message to the tribes of Judah and Benjamin and called together all the men who were 20 years old and older. 300,000 men went to Jerusalem, all of them ready for battle and able to fight with spears and shields. Amaziah grouped these soldiers according to their clans and put them under the command of his army officers. Amaziah also paid almost 4 tons of silver to hire 100,000 soldiers from Israel. One of God's prophets said,
"Your Majesty, don't let these Israelite soldiers march into battle with you. The Lord has refused to help anyone from the northern kingdom of Israel, and so he will let your enemies defeat you even if you fight hard. He is the one who brings both victory and defeat."
Amaziah replied,
"What am I supposed to do about all the silver I paid these troops?"
"The Lord will give you back even more than you paid,"
the prophet answered. Amaziah ordered the troops from Israel to go home, but when they left, they were furious with the people of Judah. After Amaziah got his courage back, he led his troops to Salt Valley, where he killed 10,000 Edomite soldiers in battle. He captured 10,000 more soldiers and dragged them to the top of a high cliff. Then he pushed them over the side, and they all were killed on the rocks below. Meanwhile, the Israelite troops that Amaziah had sent home raided the towns in Judah between Samaria and Beth-horon. They killed 3,000 people and carried off their possessions. After Amaziah had defeated the Edomite army, he returned to Jerusalem. He took with him the idols of the Edomite gods and set them up. Then he bowed down and offered them sacrifices. This made the Lord very angry, and he sent a prophet to ask Amaziah,
"Why would you worship these foreign gods that couldn't even save their own people from your attack?"
But before the prophet finished speaking, Amaziah interrupted and said,
"You're not one of my advisors. Don't say another word, or I'll have you killed."
The prophet stopped, but then he added,
"First you sinned, and now you've ignored my warning. It's clear that God has decided to punish you."
King Amaziah of Judah talked with his officials, then sent a message to King Jehoash of Israel.
"Come out and face me in battle."
Jehoash sent back a reply that said,
"Once upon a time, a small thorn bush in Lebanon arranged the marriage between his son and the daughter of a large cedar tree. But a wild animal came along and trampled the small bush. Amaziah, you think you're so powerful because you defeated Edom, but stay at home and do your celebrating. If you cause any trouble, both you and your kingdom of Judah will be destroyed."
God made Amaziah stubborn because he was planning to punish him for worshiping the Edomite gods. Amaziah refused to listen to Jehoash's warning, so Jehoash led his army to the town of Beth-shemesh in Judah to attack Amaziah and his troops. During the battle, Judah's army was crushed. Every soldier from Judah ran back home, and Jehoash captured Amaziah. Jehoash took Amaziah with him when he went to attack Jerusalem. Jehoash broke down the city wall from Ephraim Gate to Corner Gate, a section about 600 feet long. He carried away the gold, the silver, and all the valuable furnishings from God's temple, where the descendants of Obed-Edom stood guard. He robbed the king's treasury, took hostages, then returned to Samaria. Amaziah lived 15 years after Jehoash died. Everything else Amaziah did while he was king is written in the history of the kings of Judah and Israel. As soon as Amaziah started disobeying the Lord, some people in Jerusalem plotted against Amaziah. He was able to escape to the town of Lachish, but another group of people caught him and killed him there. His body was taken to Jerusalem on horseback and buried beside his ancestors. 2 Chronicles, chapter 26. After the death of King Amaziah, the people of Judah crowned his son Uzziah king, even though he was only 16 at the time. Uzziah ruled 52 years from Jerusalem, the hometown of his mother Jecholiah. During his rule, he recaptured and rebuilt the town of Elath. He obeyed the Lord by doing right, as his father Amaziah had done. Zechariah was Uzziah's advisor and taught him to obey God. And so, as long as Zechariah was alive, Uzziah was faithful to God, and God made him successful. While Uzziah was king, he started a war against the Philistines. He smashed the walls of the cities of Gath, Jabneh, and Ashdod, then rebuilt towns around Ashdod and in other parts of Philistia. God helped him defeat the Philistines, the Arabs living in Gur-Baal, and the Meunites. Even the Ammonites paid taxes to Uzziah. He became very powerful, and people who lived as far away as Egypt heard about him. In Jerusalem, Uzziah built fortified towers at the corner gate, the valley gate, and the place where the city wall turned inward. He also built defense towers out in the desert. He owned such a large herd of livestock in the western foothills and in the flatlands that he had cisterns dug there to catch the rainwater. He loved farming, so he had crops and vineyards planted in the hill country wherever there was fertile soil, and he hired farmers to take care of them. Uzziah's army was always ready for battle. Jeiel and Maaseiah were the officers who kept track of the number of soldiers, and these two men were under the command of Hananiah, one of Uzziah's officials. There were 307,500 trained soldiers, all under the command of 2,600 clan leaders. These powerful troops protected the king against any enemy. Uzziah supplied his army with shields, spears, helmets, armor, bows, and stones used for slinging. Some of his skilled workers invented machines that could shoot arrows and sling large stones. Uzziah set these up in Jerusalem at his defense towers and at the corners of the city wall. God helped Uzziah become more and more powerful, and he was famous all over the world. Uzziah became proud of his power, and this led to his downfall. One day, Uzziah disobeyed the Lord his God by going into the temple and burning incense as an offering to him. Azariah the priest and 80 other brave priests followed Uzziah into the temple and said,
"Your Majesty, this isn't right. You are not allowed to burn incense to the Lord. That must be done only by priests who are descendants of Aaron. You will have to leave. You have sinned against the Lord, and so he will no longer bless you."
Uzziah, who was standing next to the incense altar at the time, was holding the incense burner, ready to offer incense to the Lord. He became very angry when he heard Azariah's warning, and leprosy suddenly appeared on his forehead. Azariah and the other priests saw it, and immediately told him to leave the temple. Uzziah realized that the Lord had punished him, so he hurried to get outside. Uzziah had leprosy the rest of his life. He was no longer allowed in the temple or in his own palace. That's why his son Jotham lived there and ruled in his place. Everything else Uzziah did while he was king is in the records written by the prophet Isaiah, son of Amos. Since Uzziah had leprosy, he could not be buried in the royal tombs. Instead, he was buried in a nearby cemetery that the kings owned. His son Jotham then became king. 2 Chronicles, chapter 27. Jotham was 25 years old when he became king of Judah, and he ruled from Jerusalem for 16 years. Jerusha, his mother, was the daughter of Zadok. Jotham obeyed the Lord and did right. He followed the example of his father Uzziah, except he never burned incense in the temple as his father had done. But the people of Judah kept sinning against the Lord. Jotham rebuilt the upper gate of the temple and did a lot of work to repair the wall near Mount Ophel. He built towns in the mountains of Judah and built fortresses and defense towers in the forests. During his rule, he attacked and defeated the Ammonites. Then every year for the next 3 years, he forced them to pay 4 tons of silver, 60,000 bushels of wheat, and 60,000 bushels of barley. Jotham remained faithful to the Lord his God and became a very powerful king. Everything else Jotham did while he was king, including the wars he fought, is written in the history of the kings of Israel and Judah. After he had ruled Judah 16 years, he died at the age of 41. He was buried in Jerusalem, and his son Ahaz became king. 2 Chronicles, chapter 28. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king of Judah, and he ruled from Jerusalem for 16 years. Ahaz was nothing like his ancestor David. Ahaz disobeyed the Lord and was as sinful as the kings of Israel. He made idols of the god Baal, and he offered sacrifices in Hinnom Valley. Worst of all, Ahaz sacrificed his own sons, which was a disgusting custom of the nations that the Lord had forced out of Israel. Ahaz offered sacrifices at the local shrines, as well as on every hill and in the shade of large trees. Ahaz and the people of Judah sinned and turned away from the Lord, the God their ancestors had worshipped. So the Lord punished them by letting their enemies defeat them. The king of Syria attacked Judah and took many of its people to Damascus as prisoners. King Pekah of Israel later defeated Judah and killed 120,000 of its bravest soldiers in one day. During that battle, an Israelite soldier named Zichri killed 3 men from Judah: Maaseiah, the king's son, Azrikam, the official in charge of the palace, and Elkanah, the king's second in command. The Israelite troops captured 200,000 women and children and took them back to their capital city of Samaria, along with a large amount of their possessions. They did these things even though the people of Judah were their own relatives. Oded lived in Samaria and was one of the Lord's prophets. He met Israel's army on their way back from Judah and said to them,
"The Lord God of your ancestors let you defeat Judah's army only because he was angry with them. But you should not have been so cruel. If you make slaves of the people of Judah and Jerusalem, you will be as guilty as they are of sinning against the Lord. Send these prisoners back home. They are your own relatives. If you don't, the Lord will punish you in his anger."
About the same time, 4 of Israel's leaders arrived. They were Azariah, son of Johanan, Berechiah, son of Meshillemoth, Jehizkiah, son of Shallum, and Amasa, son of Hadlai. They agreed with Oded that the Israelite troops were wrong, and they said,
"If you bring these prisoners into Samaria, that will be one more thing we've done to sin against the Lord, and he is already angry enough at us."
So in front of the leaders and the crowd, the troops handed over their prisoners and the property they had taken from Judah. The 4 leaders took some of the stolen clothes and gave them to the prisoners who needed something to wear. They later gave them all a new change of clothes and shoes, then fixed them something to eat and drink, and cleaned their wounds with olive oil. They gave donkeys to those who were too weak to walk, and led all of them back to Jericho, the city known for its palm trees. The leaders then returned to Samaria. Sometime later, the Edomites attacked the eastern part of Judah again and carried away prisoners. And at the same time, the Philistines raided towns in the western foothills and in the southern desert. They conquered the towns of Beth-Shemesh, Aijalon, Gederoth, Soko, Timnah, and Gimzo, including the villages around them. Then some of the Philistines went to live in these places. Ahaz sent a message to King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria and begged for help. But God was punishing Judah with these disasters because Ahaz had disobeyed him and refused to stop Judah from sinning. So Tiglath-Pileser came to Judah, but instead of helping, he made things worse. Ahaz gave him gifts from the Lord's temple and the king's palace, as well as from the homes of Israel's other leaders. The Assyrian king still refused to help Ahaz. Even after all these terrible things happened to Ahaz, he sinned against the Lord even worse than before. He said to himself,
"The Syrian gods must have helped their kings defeat me. Maybe if I offer sacrifices to those gods, they will help me."
That was the sin that finally led to the downfall of Ahaz, as well as to the destruction of Judah. Ahaz collected all the furnishings of the temple and smashed them to pieces. Then he locked the doors to the temple and set up altars to foreign gods on every street corner in Jerusalem. In every city and town in Judah, he built local shrines to worship foreign gods. All of this made the Lord God of his ancestors very angry. Everything else Ahaz did while he was king is written in the history of the kings of Judah and Israel. Ahaz died and was buried in Jerusalem, but not in the royal tombs. His son Hezekiah then became king.